Hello, friends. Greg Braden here. I want to be the first to welcome you to this year's Earthkeeper Summit. I'm here with my dear friend, my spiritual brother, my colleague, Bruce Lipton. Bruce, welcome to Earthkeepers.
Well, I want to thank all of our audience out here because we have some very important things to talk about. What's happening in the world today?
What's happening in the world and what's happening with community. You are community, and I want to thank you for supporting Earthkeepers and being part of our global family. With a lot of people who have come from all over the world to be together as community, as family. And I think it's really important that we come together as family right now. And I just want to ask you, what do you think's going on in the world, and where does community fit into what's happening in the world?
Well, the nature of what's happening in the world today, Greg, is that we're facing an evolutionary upheaval. That human civilization at this moment is unsustainable. That it actually, science has told us that it takes 1.6 planet Earths to provide for today's civilization. Well, of course, the problem is there's no extra 0.6 planet, so it says that we have to change the way we're living on this planet in order not just to survive, but we really want to learn how to thrive into the future.
You know, I agree. And to make that change, we can all change what we do in the world around us, but the change really begins with the way we think about ourselves, about our relationship to the world. And that's why I think these summits are so important, because people come from all over the world, researchers, scientists, authors, speakers, that have dedicated their lives to understanding the deep truth of our relationship, not only to the earth, but to one another and to ourselves. And it's those shifts, those subtle shifts in the way we think about ourselves, the way we tell our story. We all have a story, and we live our lives based upon that story. We heal our bodies based upon the way we've been taught to think. We choose our partners, we choose our relationships, we choose our politics based on the way we've been taught to think. And there's a new human story that's emerging, and that story is what is emerging from this conference, I think.
Well, yeah, basically there's a whole upheaval in science that we have been led to believe that genes control the character of our lives. And now we know that our consciousness is really what's responsible for creating our personal behavior and the way we react in the world. And it's really important because when we were programmed to believe that genes control us, we saw ourselves as victims. As far as we know, we didn't pick the genes. If we don't like the character, we can't change the genes. And then we told the public that genes turn on and off by themselves. And I say, if you put all that together, it really suggests that we are victims of our life, that victims of our heredity. What is running in our family is going to predict what's going to happen to us. But there's a new science, epigenetics, and it sounds like genetics, but epigenetics, epi means above. So we talk about skin, we call it epidermis. That means epi above the dermis, that's where the skin is. Epigenetics is a fabulous new science because it says, let's say this character is under genetic control. That was what we used to believe, and that would mean that genes control it and we don't. But now we know this character is under epigenetic control, and that is profoundly different because it means control epi above the genes, and that's where our consciousness comes into play, that we are actually creating our biology, our genetics, and our behavior in the world.
You know, Bruce, what you're talking about is a paradigm shift, and it's a paradigm shift that goes right back to the first statement in this conversation. It's a paradigm shift in terms of the way that we've been taught to think. We have been conditioned for multiple generations through the best universities in the world to see ourselves as powerless victims of an external environment that we have no control over. And if we are powerless in relationship to the world out there, we're being taught that we are also flawed as a species. We're being taught that human emotions are a flaw because they change the way we make our decisions. They impact our logic. We're being taught that that humans are inferior to machines. And if that's true, then we need a savior. And the savior is being touted as technology. So that they're dangling this glamorous technology of artificial intelligence, AI, computer chips in the brain, chemicals in the blood, sensors under the skin, and young people are being taught that this is the wave of the future. What they're really being taught is to relinquish their humanness in exchange for the technology. What you're talking about is a paradigm shift, because you're saying through our very humanness, we have the ability to transcend, not just to survive, but to transcend, to become more than the suffering of our lives, more than the hurt, more than the pain that we have been conditioned to accept in our humanness. And that is a radical thought. It's a radical way of thinking.
Well, of course it is, because what the difference is, as I mentioned, that if we were controlled by genes, then we're victims. And when a person perceives themselves to be a victim, then they feel powerless in the world. And then all of a sudden, when you feel powerless, you look to somebody else or something else and say, how can I survive when I have no power? And then I say, well, again, this evolutionary change involves not just the biology, but the physics is most important. I go, what do you mean the physics? I go, well, we've been programmed by conventional classical physics that the universe is subdivided into matter and energy. And that matter and energy don't communicate with each other. A body being made out of matter cannot be affected by energy, but can be affected only by other matter. And this led us to the belief that if there's anything wrong with our system, we must take another form of matter, which now we call pharmaceutical agents, to bring the pharmaceutical agents in and control who we are. The problem with that is that whole physics is wrong. That the new physics, and it's not that new, it's 100 years old, quantum physics, the primary principle of quantum physics, number one, is that everything is energy. And that's very difficult for most people to accept, because energy is invisible. And it's really interesting, because Einstein's quote said that our perceptions of the world are an illusion, albeit a persistent illusion, because he, among all the other quantum physicists at the time, recognized that a human is energy, and it's connected to energy, and that thoughts are energy. And then quantum physics even takes the next step and says that consciousness is the creator of our life and our life experiences. And all of a sudden it says, well, all of a sudden we can change our consciousness. We're the ones that have power. So take us from victim of genes to quantum physics. It says we're not victims, we are masters of our reality. We are creating with consciousness. And the beautiful part about it is you can change your consciousness anytime. And that means you can change how you live in the world and how you experience the world. And just to, get another thing out, of course, we blame genes for the illnesses that are on this planet. And here's a very important fact, and that is less than 1% of illness on this planet is actually connected to genes. That over 90% of illness is related to the stress, and that's what we're creating. So if we change the stress, the health crisis would disappear right away.
Well, this goes back to the paradigm shift that we are talking about. You are talking about energy and also talking about the human body. What many people don't know is that the human body is an energy processor, all the way down to the level of the genes and the DNA and the cells. So for example, we know every cell in the human body. The average human, they say, is about 50 trillion or so cells, whatever average is. The average cell generates about 0.07 volts of electrical potential. And you say, well, that's not much potential. And I agree, but you do the math, 50 trillion times cells times 0.07, and all of a sudden you're talking about around 3.5 billion trillion volts of electricity. Is what we're talking about. But it doesn't stop there, because every cell, beyond producing that electrical charge, every cell functions as a capacitor. It stores and releases energy. It functions as a resistor, as a transistor. I mean, these are old terms. A lot of young people don't know because they're all on printed circuits now. But back in the old days, we used to see vacuum tubes, and we used to see resistors and capacitors and transistors and all of our electronics that mimic what we actually do in our bodies. Every cell in our body is a photon receptor. We're receiving photons of light. Light is information. We transmit that information. Every cell in the body functions as a memory chip. We store information and we retrieve that information just like we do in a memory chip. Here's a really interesting one. DNA stores information. It has a record of every genetic transaction that has ever occurred in that species. That record is immutable, it's transparent, and it's secure. And that technology that we embody is so powerful, it's now being used in what's called blockchain technology to create the new financial systems of the world that are secure, immutable, and transparent. So we are actually moving this energy that you're talking about, that science were talking about over 100, at the beginning of the 20th century, they were talking about this. We have the ability to transmit and transmute this energy through something that no other form of life can do the way that we do, and that is self-regulation of our biology. That's where the epigenetics is so powerful that you're talking about.
Well, yeah, what people don't realize is they say a gene is a program that controls what we are. But they don't understand that the new science of epigenetics says, by the way we are thinking, and as you brought up, a cell is a chip, a programmable chip, that our thoughts are the programmers of those chips. And you can program health into a cell, or you can program disease based on, are you living in love, are you living in fear? That makes all the difference in the world. So every cell is programmable, and it's really based on their consciousness. So our consciousness is translated into chemistry by the brain, and then that chemistry goes into the blood, and the blood delivers that chemistry to the 50 trillion cells, and that's the chemistry that activates the chip. So all of a sudden it says, well, what are you thinking these days? Are you afraid? Well, if you start to be afraid, then you get into what is called protection. And what people don't understand is this. For growth, you have to be open and take the signals in, whether it's love or food or anything that you want to build your body. But for protection, you have to be closed down to keep out the things that are threatening. And today's world is so in fear that we live in so much protection that we're closing ourselves down. And when we start to close ourselves down, we start to lose the ability to grow and maintain our lives. And again, this is why we have a healthcare crisis on the planet. And then again, since we believe it was genes, then we all seek some kind of pharmaceutical chemical to correct for any problem in our life. And it's like, the problems are not due to the genes. The problems are due to the consciousness that is programming the cells. And so this is an opportunity for us to wake up and say, what are you thinking? Why? What are you thinking is what changes our genetic activity.
Yeah, but not only what you're thinking, that's important, but what are you feeling? This is where, for 40 years of my adult life, I've been blessed to journey alone and also lead groups into some of the most isolated and remote and beautiful and pristine, magnificent places in the world today. The monasteries, 18,000 feet above sea level in Tibet, and Nepal and India and Egypt and Bolivia and Peru and the Yucatan and the curanderos and the healers and the shamans, and as different as they are from one another, common theme in all of these indigenous traditions is the power of the human heart, along with the mind, to create what's happening in our bodies. Now, as a scientist, that didn't make a lot of sense to the science until 1991. 91, scientists discovered neurons, 40,000 sensory neurites in the human heart, forming their own neural network that thinks, feels, remembers, and senses independently the cranial brain. So our brain and our heart working together are determining how we perceive our relationship to the world around us. Are we in fear? Do we feel secure, a sense of well-being, or are we constantly vigilant all the time? That is a very powerful epigenetic, in my understanding, a powerful epigenetic trigger for what's happening in the cells.
Well, it's so interesting because you went out into the world and looked at the world from the outside, and as a cell biologist, I went into the cells to figure out what was going on the inside, and everything you're talking about is replicated inside the human body. As you said, yes, the heart will have a sensory experience of what's going on, but that sensory experience goes up to the brain. But then the brain translates that sensory experience into the chemistry, which goes through the body. And people don't understand this because they think my gene is my program. And a part of epigenetics they're completely unaware of is that a single gene blueprint, which is a blueprint to make the building blocks of the body called proteins. You can alter the gene blueprint by how you experience the world through the chemistry. As you said, it's very important, I didn't mention it before, that it's not just emotions, but what you think about what's happening is translated by the brain into complementary chemistry. That chemistry that goes into the cell, and it can alter the readout of your genes so that one gene blueprint can make over 3,000 different proteins based on how you experience in the world.
That's a mind blower.
Well, it is because, you know, as I said, everyone thought the genes were responsible, but it turns out, as I said, less than 1% of the illness is actually due to the genes, but it's all due to what we said, the emotions that you talked about, the concentration that we're creating, the experiences that we're afraid of or in favor of in the world. All of this is adjusting who we are. Now, again, the big difference, and this is the wake-up call for the world right now. The wake-up call is we are creators. We are creating not just our life experiences on the inside, but through those life experiences, we're manifesting the world on the outside. And you know what's interesting is people say, well, if I'm a creator, then how come the world looks the way it is? Because I don't want to create violence and war and disease. That's not my creative ability. Why are we having this a problem? Well, here comes the bigger issue. The brain and the mind. Well, everyone talks about the mind, like, oh, there's a single mind. I go, no, there are two minds. And all of a sudden I say, well, what's different? Well, the latest evolution of the mind right behind your forehead is called the conscious mind. That's the creative mind. The rest of the mind back here, about 90%, is actually called the subconscious mind. That's the habit mind. And the difference between the two is when you're coming from your conscious creative mind, then you're manifesting what you wish and your desire. When you're coming from your subconscious mind, that's a program. That's like the hard drive in a computer. And what people have to recognize is this: where did our programs come from that go into the subconscious mind? Well, a child, when it's born, very quickly has to learn the rules of how to be a member of a family, how to be a member of a community. And it's very interesting because the human brain is designed to be in a state of hypnosis. Theta is the brain activity for the first 7 years of a child's life. And this is important because how's a young infant going to learn all the rules to be the family or the community? And the answer is they don't have to learn the rules. All they have to do is watch. So they watch the mother, the father, the community, and they download, just like a video camera. They download what they see. Those become programs. I say, so what's important? I say, well, the fundamental programs in your subconscious mind didn't even come from you. You copied them from other people. If they had a problem, then you copied their problem. For example, everyone thinks that cancer is due to genes. It's like, no, cancer is not due to genes. There's not one gene that causes cancer.
No cancer gene.
There is no cancer gene. I said, well, then where's cancer coming from? And the answer is not living in harmony. And I said, well, where does that come from? I said, well, the programs that were downloaded. So I'll give you an example. When a child is adopted into a family where there's cancer running in that family, it turns out the adopted child will get the same family cancer even though the adopted child came from totally different genetics. So where did the cancer come from? The programming in that first 7 years. And if it's dysfunctional programming, then these programs are built in. And then just to conclude on this, where's the most important part? The conscious mind is creative mind, but the conscious mind can do two things. It can look out at the world, or it can think. And I said, what's different? Well, if the conscious mind's looking out at the world, it's, guiding the individual in the world experiences. But if the conscious mind is thinking, it's not looking out at the world. And I said, well, let's say you're driving the car and you start thinking. I said, well, when you're thinking, you're not looking out the windshield. I said, well, what does that mean? Are you going to be in trouble? I go, no. I say, why? And here's the important part. The subconscious mind is autopilot. And when the conscious mind is thinking, the programs in the subconscious mind take over the behavior. And I go, well, what's important about that? I said, well, thinking is 95% of the day. And I go, so what's the conclusion of all this? Only 5% of the day are you creating the life that you want, the one you have wishes and desires for, conscious mind. Because that mind, 95% of the day is thinking, the subconscious mind takes over 95% of the day. Those are the programs. Well, if they're not functional programs, then you're leading a dysfunctional life. And then the last part of this is, if you're thinking, you're not looking out. And if you're not looking out, you're the one that doesn't see your own behavior. And if we have over 60% of our programs as dysfunction, then that means 95% of the day you are creating behavior that's sabotaging you, and you're the only one that can't see it. Everybody else can see it, and they respond to those programs. And so in conclusion, we look at our life and say, oh, I'm a victim. I didn't want to create this violence. I didn't want to create the problems in this world. I go, well, no, you didn't want to do that. You, being conscious mind, your subconscious mind do it. So one story, just to put it all together, is you have a friend and you know your friend's behavior very well, and you know your friend's parent. And one day you see your friend has the same behavior as the parent, so you feel like, oh, I got to tell her. I go, hey, Bill, you're just like your dad. Back away from Bill, because I know what Bill's going to say, and you've heard it. He's going to say, how can you compare me to my dad? I'm nothing like my dad. The audience laughs because they have the experience. I say, why did Bill say he's not like his dad? And the answer is, because he's the one that can't see the program that he downloaded from his dad playing 95% of the day, but everybody else does. And all of a sudden, that makes Bill feel like a victim, because he doesn't even see he's even creating his life. He just sees the response of what's happening, and then he feels like, oh, this person messed with me, and that person caused a problem, without recognizing he was the one that was initially creating the bad program. And then, I hate to say this, but the truth is, we are all Bill. Every one of us is doing this every day. Are you creating your life? And the answer is 5%. 95% is from those programs.
You know, what you have just said, I mean, there's so much to unpack. And what you said is so important. I'm researching a new book right now on some of these topics. And there are studies now that have been done in recent years. For example, the civil war in Syria has been going on long enough that refugees now are living in refugee camps in Jordan long enough that they're actually having babies and starting new families in the refugee camps. And what they found is that the children that are being born in the refugee camps, not only those first 7 years are important, but what happened when they were in their mother's womb. The chemistry of the mother living in fear, living in stress with no relief, nature programs that chemistry into the fetus, assuming that the fetus is going to be in the same environment that the mother is, so that the fetus is ready for life when it comes out. Well, these young kids now are coming out with stress chemistry, and they're coming out with all of the energy is going into the stress, which means it's not going into healing and rejuvenation, regeneration. Statistically, their bodies are smaller, cognitive impairment, they're not developing their brain size is smaller, and they've got all kinds of health issues because they're in this constant stress. The good news of what you're talking about is, if that's us, we don't have to be in a refugee camp. We can live in the stress of a work environment, the stress of a bad marriage or bad relationship, or a world on the brink of war. Listening to the media, that stresses everyone. The good news is that we have the ability to self-regulate our biology, to self-regulate the chemistry in our bodies so that we are not victims of that stress. The key is we have to know, not only know, we have to believe that we have that ability. And Bruce, I have to tell you, I was in school back in the 1950s, 1960s, and this isn't what we were taught when we were in school. Wow. When I was in school, I was taught that one gene creates one protein in the body. What you've just said illustrates how powerful we are. The fact that the way we perceive our relationship to the world can trigger that one gene into hundreds of different proteins in a way no other form of life can do consciously. We're the only form of life I know that can sit down consciously in a moment in time, and we can say, in this moment, I choose to enhance my immune system and create a stronger immune system. I choose to create resilience to my world. I choose to access states of deep intuition. I choose to create states of super memory, super learning, super cognition, and much more. No other form of life can do that the way that we can do that. We have to believe that it's possible. And the work that you've done, I learn every time I have a conversation with you. You know, I've known you for so many years. We're so busy, we don't get to talk much. I have to come and do an interview with you to have a conversation, but I learn every time I speak with you.
Well, for me, it's important because your work and my work dovetail to make a complete picture. Yeah. And that's what, you know, people get piece in a piece, but they don't see it all coming together. And as you brought up, let me just bring it up because it's, again, so very important. When I was a professor in the medical school and I was teaching medical students about the nature of development, child development and all that, and we used to say, what's the role of the mother? And we said, oh, she provides nutrition because the blood of the mother is what goes to the womb and the fetus lives off the blood of the mother. And so we should say, yeah, so a mother should eat well, take vitamins and supplement and exercise. I said, and what else? He said, no, that's all they have to do because at the time, the belief was, oh, the genes of the fetus will develop the fetus. All the mother had to do was just feed the fetus. But we now know that the mother is Head Start program because she's living in the world and her experiences of the world are transmitted in the blood. Now, again, blood has more than nutrition, and we talked about that. It has all those signals and information about how the mother's responding so that the fetus is experiencing what the mother is experiencing. And epigenetics takes the mother's experiences and the chemistry of the blood and then adjusts the genetics of the fetus to respond to the mother's experiences. So all of a sudden it says, oh my goodness, mothers have a much more important role in raising children than we've led them to believe. They are actually beginning the programming of the genetics of the child to live in the world that she's experiencing. So if she's a happy person and enjoying life, then the signals in her blood going to the fetus are giving the fetus the information life is good and health is wonderful. But if she's in fear or stress, then that goes in and that changes the physiology and genetics of the fetus because the fetus now is having to accommodate when it's born to live in that stressful world. And all of a sudden it changes the biology of that individual. In fact, the blood distribution determines the development of every organ because the blood also has the energy that creates the vitality of that organ. And it turns out when a person is in stress, the blood vessels of the forebrain, the thinking part, are squeezed shut and pushes the blood to the hindbrain, which is reaction. Reaction is faster than thinking. So I say, so what does that mean? I say, if the mother is in stress, the fetus, the blood of the fetus is not going to the development of the conscious part, it's going to the development of the hindbrain, reaction, response. It turns out, listen to this number, a child can lose 52% of its intelligence if the mother is under stress because of the lack of the development of the conscious creative brain.
Well, that's true even for adults. When that happens, we don't make decisions clearly. We don't think clearly because the brain is going preferentially to where, or the blood to where it's needed so that we can survive. So, so let me ask this. I know we're coming to the close of this conversation. In an ideal situation, we would all have ideal health if we all came from ideal family environments. A lot of us have come from environments in a time in history after World War II, and in my case, and my family living through that, or in the stress of so many environmental factors in the world today. We're here now, and we're watching a world undergo a magnitude of change in a briefer period of time than we've ever seen. And people all over the world, they're saying two things to me. You're probably hearing it as well. Number one, what's going on? That's a whole different conversation. Number two, what can we do about it in our own lives? And that's what we're talking about now. So if someone asks you, Bruce, what is the healthiest thing that I can do for myself and my family in the presence of everything that's happening in the world? How would you answer that?
Well, there's one thing, and it's called being mindful, staying present. I go, what does that mean? It says you stop thinking and you stay in the present moment and deal with the present moment, because if you're not thinking, then your conscious brain is the one that's being the creative control. As I said, normally it's only 5%, but that's because we're thinking. If we stop thinking, then the conscious brain can be over 90% of control, conscious brain being wishes and desires. So that's fairly difficult to stay in the present moment because we have so many things to think about. Our job, our responsibilities, where we're going, what we're doing. So that's a very difficult thing. So staying mindful is hard. The only other thing you can do is rewrite the programs in the subconscious. And I just need to give a little bit of advice because, first of all, what programs do you have? And I say, why? Because you were being programmed before you were born. You were programmed a whole year from 0 to 1. What program did you get when you were under 1 year old? I don't know. Okay, you were programmed another year from 1 to 2. What program did you get then? I don't know. Or up to 3. And all of a sudden I say, well then, the biggest issue is, what are my programs and how are they affecting my life? And I just want to offer this before we close so I give a chance for people to think about it. It comes out very simple. The things that you like that come into your life, they come in because you have programs to acknowledge those things. But the things that we want and desire, but we struggle, we work hard, we put a lot of effort in. I'm going to make it happen. I'm working real hard. And I go, why are you working so hard?
It means you're not going with the flow.
I'm not going with the flow, but the point about it is that destination that you were looking for and struggling for is not supported by the program. So you can look at your life right now and look at your programs. The things that come in you like, hey, don't worry, you got program for those. The things that you struggle over, your programs don't support that. And then I say, well, this is the opportunity now to say, well, I want to change that program. There are just 3 ways to change. So very simply is this. How'd you get the program in the first 7 years of your life? I say, the brain was in a state of hypnosis. I go, so? I say, well, you know, every night when you go to bed, the moment you sleep, the moment you fall asleep, the brain activity is in the same theta activity, hypnosis. So if you put earbuds or earphones on and listen to what is called a self-help program while you're sleeping, that program is not going into the conscious mind, that's sleeping. It's going into the subconscious mind so you can reprogram at night.
I just want to interject here. That's exactly the reason you don't want to go to sleep with the television on a cable news network program, listening to all of the fear that the network is programming for the hours that you're sleeping.
Yeah.
And I know people that do this, and they have a hard time with it.
I know because they don't even know they're being programmed because they're sleeping and they don't realize whatever was coming across the information channel was going straight into hypnosis and being programmed in the life.
It's usually not the good news channel.
No. So that's called self-hypnosis.
That was one. Okay.
Self-hypnosis is one. Number 2, look, you still learn programs after age 7. You make habits. I say, how? You practice. You repeat something. You learn how to drive a car, it's a program. You learn how to play a music instrument, you practice, now it's a program. You want to change the program, practice something new. There's a new age phrase that always makes me laugh. It's called fake it till you make it. Meaning if you're not a happy person, I say, well, what can you do? I say, all day long, just to yourself, as many times as you can say all day long, I am happy, I am happy. And I go, why? It's the repetition that makes habit. And the more you repeat that, the brain will ultimately turn it into a habit. So you repeat it, and then one day you wake up and you're happy. Why? Because you've made a new habit. That's how it works. And the last thing is, there's a new version of psychology called energy psychology. And what's important is, conventional like cognitive therapy wants you to go back and review your life and talk about all the problems. I say, you already had all the problems. You end up with a program. You have the program now. You don't have to go back and repeat the program. What you want to do is take the program from this moment and move forward. So there's a variety of modalities called energy psychology. Very quickly, my website, brucelipton.com, under resources has over 25 listings of different modalities, a short description, and a website to get to the source. And I say, these are rapid learning techniques. Some of these techniques you can reprogram a program that's been dysfunctional in 10 or 15 minutes. There's an old saying, necessity is the mother of invention. Yeah. And as we talked about when we started, we're facing an evolutionary upheaval, and humans have a necessity to change their behavior because human behavior is causing the problem. And then all of a sudden this new form of energy psychology shows up because we need to rapidly change our beliefs. And the moment you change the beliefs, you become empowered. And this is what your work and my work, where we come together, is to give a message to the people. We perceive ourselves to be victim. That's the illusion. We have been programmed to be victims. And if we change the program, then we become masters.
So to be a victim is a choice.
Oh, they didn't know that. People don't know that, you know, because they didn't even know that there was a choice. And that's why I love working with this man, because he's my brother. And more than that, what is his information integrated with my information is the empowerment that is necessary to move from where we are and not survive into the future, but we can thrive into the future. And I want to thank him for that, because he added that wonderful information to my biology. So I appreciate it.
Oh, well, thank you, Bruce. You know, the feeling's mutual. I'm going to add one thing. The energy psychology that you're talking about, a powerful component that's only been available in recent years, goes back to what we said earlier in this conversation. The discovery of the neurons in the heart now open the door to a viable technique that anybody can do anytime in their lives of harmonizing, or another way of saying it is creating coherence between the neural network in the heart and the neural network in the brain. When we create that coherence, what the science shows very clearly is we strengthen our immune system almost immediately, that we awaken longevity enzymes in the body that naturally occur. And if you're awakening longevity enzymes, it's not just about living longer. It means you're healing to achieve that longevity. You are creating what's called greater heart rate variability, HRV, which creates more resilience to change in our lives, and many, many other things. So the ability, this is self-regulation, the ability to consciously harmonize to the heart and the brain, to create the coherence. There's a frequency, it's 0.1 hertz. When we can feel the feelings from the heart that send 0.1 hertz to the brain, then we open the door to this coherence. The Institute of Heart Math in Boulder Creek, California has been a pioneering research institute pioneering this technology. I'm going to invite, if you haven't already, www.heartmath.org. Everything is free. It'll give you the techniques, research, all of those kinds of things. It's a powerful scientific step that mirrors many of our most ancient and cherished spiritual traditions that tell us that we may choose to be masters or we may choose to be victims. And once we know we have a choice, then it becomes a choice. And these are the tools to do that. So, Bruce, thank you so much for this conversation.
I want to thank you for how you provided so much information to add to the biology so that we as a collective population can flow into the future, and that's why we're here.
That's why I love working with this man. Thank you all for all you're doing to create the best world possible. We look forward to our next.